high as 80 miles an hour. Hickman radioed ahead to the South Chicago Heights to head them off, but they made a quick turn eastbound on Steger Road. Going at high speeds, he lost them in a fog bank and slowed down. When he got to the Milwaukee Railroad tracks, he found the car in the field about 20 feet from the road. They had hit the 91st car of the 142-car train, which was heading south towards Faithorn. All four were ejected from the auto and died. The speedometer was stuck at 80 miles an hour. The time was like 12:40 a.m. It was not long after they'd gotten a car from their friend, and the car was not his, it was his father's, so I don't think he was too happy when he found out about that. They claimed their driver was Bookmeyer from Lumber Street,
What year was that?
1955. Nick Reynolds was only 17 and he left behind his 16-year-old wife, Joanne, who worked at a steel plant in Chicago Heights. And you know Joanne?
Joanne is my aunt, so Dickie was my uncle by marriage for a short period of time. She was 20 years younger than my mother, and her parents sent her down here to live in Crete to kind of calm her down. It's kind of a wild thing to see how that worked out. She and Dickie, I think, went to Kentucky and got married secretly. And it's one of my first memories. I think I was only 4 years old. The police coming to our house on East Street, trying to make sure Joanne was here. They found some women's clothing in the car too, and wanted to make sure that she wasn't in the car and got ejected also. And I remember going to Spindler's Kelly in Chicago Heights with the family to pick out a casket. So it was kind of weird how you remember certain things and not remember where I put my cell phone most of the time. But that kind of stuff with me. I remember him. He was a nice kid, but unfortunately,
I couldn't find her maiden name.
her maiden name was Turchi, Turchi.
She wasn't from here, right?
No, her parents at that time lived up near Highwood, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, she was 20 years younger than my mom, so my mother was kind of shepherding her through the teenage years of life, and as I said, obviously didn't work out for her. But she remarried, and she and her cousin, my cousin, still lives in Steger.
He's here, and up here, this is that's his brother there. I just saw that the other night. I didn't even know it was here. I was saying Bookmeyer was the driver, and I can't find his first name. But he lived on 1232 Lumber Street, and he left behind 7 sisters and 7 brothers. Most of us here in Crete know Bookmeyer. The other 2 in the car was Fred Arbuthnot, who was 19 in Chicago Heights, and Frank Charlin, 19 from South Chicago Heights. And the engineer of the train that was coming in the Faithorn was Forrest Hasty. And he lived on 1437 Main Street, which was actually right across the street from where he lived, 1440 Main Street. So he actually knew the family. That was just like one of them oddities. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Well, Martha, we're finally getting to you here. Martha Stone, Gruberman, and your brother is here?
And my brother Charles.
Charles Stone, okay.
Yeah, he's my oldest brother.
Okay, so Martha's going to tell about the Stone family.
Yeah.
Use that?
No, I don't think so. There's a small group. Okay, our mom and dad are buried here. The stone is right over there. Charles, Edgar Stone, and Ruth Virginia Stone. Our family moved in town Crete in 1955. My dad worked for Maltool, the same factory that's still out there. It's called Crete now. Crete. Okay. Maltool factory on Western. Yeah. So they were from the city. My mom and dad were both from Chicago. They had prior lived in Midlothian, started the family, and they just migrated this way. And then, especially with Maltool being as close as it is, Crete is where we were. We owned the house at 1380 Benton Street until 1993, from 1955 to 93. It's the house that's just due west of the post office. Now they put a wraparound porch on it. We had it, like I said, for about 38 years. All 8 of us children, my brother, the oldest, through my younger sister, Barbara, we all graduated Crete Learning High School. So, yeah. Steadfast to Crete. Our family's history here is brief, as far as living in town and whatnot. But Mom and Dad must have liked it because they wanted to stay. And thank you, Crete Area Historical Society, for allowing me to speak and involving me. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Your family is a pretty big family, so everybody in Crete knew Stones at one point along the line.
Yes,
so.
there was 8 children, so yeah.
Yep,
So
thank you
from
very much.
57 to 74.
Could you make a copy of that or some notes
You
or
can
something?
have this.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you very
And I
much.
have my,
Yes.
and on the back, all the years we graduated high school.
Oh, wow. Great.
Okay.
Wow.
Our next family of interest would be the Allen family, and Chuck Eckel is going to talk about them a little bit.
We're going to keep it real cozy here since it's a smaller group. If you look over toward the road, you'll see there are 2 American flags, and that marks the gravestones of the Allen family. There are technically 3 gravestones, 5 names. Excuse me, 4 names, but there are actually 5 people that were buried there. The Allen family became a part of the Crete area history in 1917 when Grover Winfield Allen moved his young family from Westport, Indiana to work on the Chicago, Terre Haute and Southeastern Railroad as an engineer. The first 2 children were born in Indiana, Robert McDonald in 1913 and Richard Harrison in 1915. Grover Winfield, who was nicknamed Duddy, was born in Chicago Heights in 1917, so that's the transfer from Indiana to Illinois. The remaining 2 children, Mary Emma May in 1919 and George Stewart in 1920, were born in Crete. Grover continued with the railroad after it became known as the Milwaukee Road until his retirement in 1953. Grover passed away in '64 and his wife Mary passed away in 1980. Perhaps the most notable fact about the Allen family was their contribution in serving his country during World War II and beyond. All 4 boys were part of the Crete contingent to volunteer for the armed forces. All 4 joined the Navy. A little aside here, there were 4 other Adams boys as part of a family group who also were part of that group that volunteered. As of August 1942, Crete and Crete Township ranked 3rd in the entire state in furnishing the greatest number of volunteers for the armed services. In total, 264 men and women answered the call to serve their country, and of these, 12 gave that supreme sacrifice. Robert, the oldest, was a photographer with the Navy Seabees. After the war, he returned to Crete for a few years using his background in photography. He and his brother George became charter members of the Crete AmVets. His wife Eleanor taught school in Crete. He eventually moved on working for an oil company in South America, and later settled back east, continuing to use his photographic experience. He passed away in Lewiston, Maine in 2003 at the age of 90. Richard was a storekeeper in the Navy. He remained in the service until the mid-1950s, then worked at and eventually retired from the Fairchild Corporation. He and his wife, Pearl, lived in Florida for most of their adult lives. Richard passed in 1995 at the age of 80. Grover Jr. became a Navy submariner. After the war, he moved to California, joined the Merchant Marine, continuing there until his retirement. He passed in 1984 in Redwood, California. George Stewart, known as Bud, also became a storekeeper, serving on the heavy cruiser USS Northampton. He, along with most of the crew, survived the torpedoing and sinking of this ship on December 1st, 1942 at the Battle of Tassafaronga, part of the Guadalcanal campaign. Shortly thereafter, he became part of the commissioning crew for the battleship USS Iowa. After the war, he remained in the Navy, continuing his duties as a supervisor of naval stores at a naval air station in New York State. It was here that he met his future wife, Margaret, who was an enlisted Wade working in his office. After 6 years of service, Bud and Mary moved back to Crete. On June 1st, 1949, Bud received the appointment to become Crete's postmaster. In June 1950, Postmaster Allen announced that after meeting certain criteria, the village of Crete would begin to be a city delivery, which is delivery of mail door-to-door by foot. The requirements were the erection of street signs, the assigning of house numbers, and the addition of an approved letterbox or mail slot to each residence. As has often been the case in Crete's history, the Lions Club got the ball rolling by selling house numbers. With these funds, the club purchased and erected 127 street signs to create street signs, and then facilitated the measuring and the mapping of streets to create a uniform system. As an aside, you will be able to learn more, and too bad more people didn't hear about it. You'll be able to learn more about the Lions Club and its history of service to this community through the October-November Historical Society displays at our public libraries. After serving for 5 years, Bud gave up his postmaster's post due to illness. In 1962, he joined the Naval Reserve and spent several years as a recruiter in the Joliet area. In retirement, Bud and Margaret, who is also known as Sis, and that's on her stone, they moved to Florida. Margaret had been an elementary teacher in Crete and in surrounding towns. Margaret passed in 1988, Bud passed in 2002. And although there is no stone marker, Bud is also buried over there. There's one star. There actually, technically, I guess should be 2 stars there because they both were veterans. Mary Emma May Allen Franklin was married to Ben.
Franklin.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I had at least somebody hanging on here. They had 2 children. Mary passed in DeKalb, Illinois in 1992. The bulk of this presentation was actually obtained through wangling a certain person here who gave me this family to look up. And when finding that I was a little sparse on information, we ended up talking with Bud Allen, who was the son of
Paul Allen.
Excuse me, Paul Allen, who was the son of Bud and Sis. He was not able to make it to the 50th anniversary of the class reunion last weekend, but I did talk with him over the phone, and he basically gave me a good portion of this information. He does live in Oxford, Ohio. He was in the military from 1973 to 1995, and he continued the Allen tradition of serving in the Navy. Thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. All right. Well, looks like I'm up talking about the Clemmy. This is going to be pretty brief. The Clemmys that I knew lived over in a farmhouse just east of the bank here in town. They lived in a farmhouse that was never painted wood. You might remember that. Just a bare wooden home. There was 3 people lived there, Frank, Minnie, and Esther. They were all siblings. None of them ever married. Quite often you'd see them walking to the Hendricks house right here to get water, drinking water and that type of thing. They probably had their own well, but they lived, the house is gone now. Frank Clemmy was I think they had a dairy farm. Frank Clemmy sold baling wire, or barbed wire, and probably 30 years ago or better, 35 years ago, I walked around out there and I found a whole bunch of different types of barbed wire out there, so I saved those things. So there's some unusual ones, so nothing spectacular as far as the collection goes, but a good variety of them. They had that house, and then they had another house built over here on Jefferson Street, about the middle of the block, past Lincoln, and they moved there in their retirement. So those are the Clemmys that I know. Jim Boehner was talking about Clemmys before a little bit. There was a Clemmy that was an auctioneer here. Clemmys were pioneers in the area too. Out there, Clemmy Road, guess that's named after the Clemmy family. And they had Clemmy School out there. The guy that was an auctioneer, quite popular. He finally earned the title of colonel. So he must have been a pretty good auctioneer. Sounds like we're going to have some competition here in a minute. So anyhow, I fondly remember the Clemmys that lived over here. Good job. So anyhow, there's a bunch of Clemmies around here. Another family here we're going to talk about briefly is the Moffats. Bob, you want to take that? And we'll be down to our last one after that.
Where's Jim at?
Yeah, he left. Yeah, Boehners are related to everybody. So.
Well, he told me a few things about the Moffats.
Okay.
You can see that little stone there with, what is that, a lamb or
Yeah.
something on it? That's the daughter. James Henry Moffat was born 1899 in Carlisle, Indiana, which is near Evansville. Their early life, him and his family spent from 1900 to 1910 living in Madison, Martin counties, Indiana. In 1917, he moved up to Detroit, Michigan, and worked for the Timken axle bearing company. And then in 1920, he moved down to Indianapolis and met up with his brother John, and they both lived there in Indianapolis for a short time. And they caught word that the railroad was hiring at Faithorn, and they figured they'd try it out, and they came to Faithorn. And both were married. James actually lived in Stager, and his brother John lived in Thornton. But he got divorced from his first wife, and then in 1923 he married Ruth May Dustin, and her connection to her grandfather was an Adams, so that's probably why he's buried here. But Epiphanies Adams, does that sound right? Name?
I know Phineas.
It was an Epiphany.
Oh, yeah, that I think I do remember.
They may not even be related.
No, I think they are. Yeah.
But they had a daughter, Ruth Rose. She was born November 1924 in Stager. So Ruth was like 4 months old, and James went to work at Faithorn. He worked on a train from Faithorn to Bensonville, and they got about halfway to Argo, and he went back and he was looking between the freight cars. He fell in between, and it rolled over and cut his legs, both his legs above his knee. They sent him to the hospital in Chicago, Washington Boulevard Hospital, where he tried to save his legs, which they couldn't, and limbs were taken off above the knees. And then 3 weeks later, while at home, said he died in Crete, so he must have been a relative or somebody's house. 3 weeks later, he died from the injuries, so he was buried here. And then his wife remarried in 1927 and moved to Chicago, but his daughter, she got sick in 1930, and she died in the hospital there from septic diphtheria. So she's like 5 years old. She's buried right there. And then a side note, his brother John also worked at Faithorn in 1958. He was working on cars out there in the yard, and he got caught in between two cars and got his hand cut off right at the wrist. So they weren't too lucky working for the railroad. That's the Moffat.
Now we hear some stories here, and there's some happy stories and some sad stories, a little bit of everything. It's part of human life, I guess. The last family we'll talk about is the Orrs. They lived out east of Crete, maybe by Old Post Road, if you're familiar with that out there, east of 394 into the area by Clemmy Woods, or Clemmy Road. They were some of the pioneers in the area here, and real old family. I remember the Orrs because I delivered papers to their house in the 60s. They lived south of where the town hall is, and Jim Orr was my customer, and he's in some pictures that we have around town. I think he was a World War II veteran, but his dad lived with him, and his dad was Ed Orr, and he was about 193 years old. He was a real old guy, and yeah, I'd go in their house, and I think they heated their house the same way they had probably for 100 years. You go in there, it smelled like wood smoke. They probably had a cook stove in there, because I had a great aunt that had the same setup. I enjoyed going over there, and they're just interesting people, and they're buried over here too. So Orrs are pioneers of the area.
Is that house still there?
No, that's where the new town hall
Okay.
sits, right there. Maybe go out there, metal detect?
Yeah. I was wondering if it was that white one on the corner with the hitching post.
Oh no, that's
Okay.
yeah. They were right where the new town hall is. The old
Yeah.
town hall, if anybody remembers, was right there where the parking lot is probably now for the town hall. Anyhow, I guess that concludes our event here. We got chased away by the rain a little bit here, but I see somebody's been religiously taking notes here. Are we going to have a quiz next time we meet?
I love history. I live on Clemmy Road.
Okay.
The first neighbors that we met lived in the old Clemmy schoolhouse,
Really?
so they were like telling us stories. The very first thing we bought when we first moved here was one of the books, the Crete book,
Good for you.
and that to read about all the history and stuff.
Well, you've heard a little bit about Clemmy tonight,
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
Now, since you're interested in history, you know, the Historical Society's got a, well, Ed left already, so.
I'm just I just got a couple more years. I'm a retirement school teacher. I teach 8th grade, and I try to find all kinds of interesting things to bring to my students and stuff like that. So as
Good
soon
for
as
you.
I have a little bit more free time, I definitely, absolutely.
Very good.
Crete Women's Club and Crete Historical Society.
That'd be great. We'd love to have you. Anybody else? I see your hair. Are you related to the Allens by any chance? Any particular interest?
I grew up in Goodnow.
Okay.
I came to a funeral today at the Lutheran,
Yeah.
and I
Who
went
is
to
that for, if you don't mind my asking?
Marjorie Batterman.
Okay.
Oh,
That's it.
really?
Yes.
Okay.
They
Local
lived
name.
they lived in Crete. She graduated Crete High School.
Yeah.
She wound up in Muhammad, Illinois. Anyway, and then I went to the library to buy one of the books, and then I saw a little thing in there about this, and I just kind of jumped in here.
Oh, good.
So yeah. And you are
I'm Tim Kiepenbrink.
okay.
I'm on the Historical Society.
I grew up Susan Beers in Goodnow, Illinois, but
Okay.
I've married a Prawley.
Oh, okay.
So, but not, it's a short tail to John over here in Crete.
Right, right.
But they were from Beecham mainly.
Well, we had a dairy night here back in March, I think, and Mrs.
Oh.
Crowley from Crowley Dairy was here.
Yeah, see, that's a
And-
relative. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I gotta keep an eye on this.
So
With
is
who?
it V, E,
Yes.
H, R, S?
Yeah. Who are you?
Bob Brown.
Runs? Well,
Clement
who's your
Beers.
father? Clement's my brother.
Your brother?
Oh, Wayne Beers?
Wayne Brown.
Runs? I know, I remember Brown Runs. Belmore.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were motorcycles and stuff.
Yeah.
They were friends with my dad. My brother is from there.
Okay. Maybe
Oh,
that's,
glad you came over.
he was in our
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I was looking to. I don't know if I would benefit by joining when I'm not from Crete.
Yeah,
I
people
love
in
all the
Arizona
history.
that are in the group.
Really? So it's the history that I love. It's really just so interesting.
I wish I would have
These
thought
names are
about it
familiar.
earlier. Ryan has put out a web page, I guess you call it, or a site that's Crete Township Pictures, and you've got 5,000 images or thereabouts out there for public viewing.
Oh, really?
If you like history, you won't have any problem finding something to look at. It's
Okay,
really
what is
good.
it? It's
We'll
a
be busy a
website?
couple months.
It's
it's
out-
on
it's out there
Facebook.
now? Oh, it's on Facebook.
Crete Township Pictures.
Okay.
And I don't even think you have to have an account with Facebook because I made it public.
I have
Public.
Facebook.
Okay.
Crete Township Pictures.
Yep. Just type that in and you'll see it.
I just wonder who's doing. I live in Mantino.
Oh, Mantino.
I wonder
Sure,
who's
there's another
taking
way to
care
do
of the
it, but I
history of
don't know.
Goodnow because it's going to be gone.
Yeah.
You know, man, I lived there a long time. I knew everybody in the town.
Yeah.
You know, we had that 45-minute ride to town, or at least it seemed like it back then. You know? Back then, I remember
Well,
sitting at this
we've got
corner.
Goodnow's Railroad Depot here in town. It used to be over by the park.
See, really? Yeah.
Yeah, because the one that we had in Crete burned down in 1948 or 50 or something like that. So I don't know if somebody from Crete stole the one out of Goodnow. They put it on a train car, brought it
That
up.
had to be like in the late 40s or something.
Yeah, that was right around there.
Yeah.
And then when they were done with the railroad station here, that railroad station is attached to the Marketplace Antique Store over here.
Really?
You know, there's the church there,
Yeah,
and then it makes kind of a U
I've
shape,
been in there, right.
and the very last
That's-
building is the depot from Goodnow.
I'll
Painted
be
red.
darned.
The
Oh,
red building.
yeah, oh wow, I didn't know that. So you learned something.
Oh, yeah.
I knew I'd learn something if I stopped.
Oh yeah,
I just
absolutely.
didn't know if it would be okay just to walk in.
And
You
that
did something?
building, that Goodnow Depot is on the National Park Service.
Is
Oh,
it?
they're pretty
Well,
classy.
let's go talk about our sign
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah, that would be great. We, a couple years ago, put in, with the town of ours, with the lease, no, lease it, and, we put in an application, 47-page application to the National Park Service to be on the National Park Service Underground Railroad Freedom Seekers Project. So we put it in, I think, I finally sent it to the lady who's in charge of the Western State.
Yeah. Until they say it's over.
And then she told us, she called me and said, you're accepted, but we got the certificate, which is right here in May. So we made a big, you know, it was just an 8.5 by 11, but this is what it is. Wow.
Really late for this.
Yeah, we're only at 2.5 hours. We only went an hour over. I didn't realize.
But that's part of the
Yeah,
building.
we paid.
Yeah.
Hey, this,
Yeah.
considering what the forecast was, this turned out pretty good.
Yeah, it was doable.
They say 3 inches by tomorrow, so it's gonna pull. Well, that's what they say.
Well,
Yep.
I've been kind of dabbing in genealogy for a while, you know, my married life, but like she, you know, you some time to sit down and make an adjustment. I bought this for a quarter at a garage
Oh,
sale.
how wonderful.
And when I bought it, you know how you look around at a garage sale? And when I got this, I just went, and I was like, it was like gold to me. And I just kept looking for more stuff, and I just kept them out. And I found it in the museum where I live. And I couldn't believe it. You're like, who wants that old book? You know?
And I have it where
Yeah, I know.
this is the house, the wood, this is
Oh,
the
yeah.
house that I now own.
Oh,
I
this
rent,
is
I
where
rent to
you're, okay.
another real